Welcome in. This is the Early Wedge. I'm Rick Gehman, and today we are taking you through everything you need to know for the DFS side of things for this week's Cognizant Classic. This is a new era of the Early Wedge. We are going to talk about what the future looks like and things to be excited about. But let me bring in my guys here for today. Sia Nejad is here. Hello, Sia.
Hello. This reminds me, Rick, of our DFS show we used to do. I mean, obviously, Greg was involved in that. We've got Mike McClure on this one, and I think everybody's really excited to have Mike. Everybody in the Early Edge and Sports Line universe. I do a DFS show with him as well, Fantasy Football Today DFS. So this is a familiar pairing, but just in a different way with everybody, I think. So I'm very happy to be here, very excited about what's being rolled out for the Early Wedge. And Rick, most importantly, very happy to be working with you on a regular basis again.
Oh boy. Well, thank you. No, I feel like I'm in bizarro world right now. Everything feels so similar, but everything feels so different. Mike McClure is here. Mike, this is a brand, the Early Wedge, that I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, has kind of spawned off the great success of the Early Edge. And now to get some added resources, a cadence of 5 times a week. That's what this is looking like for the future.
Yeah, 5 times a week, big cast, really star-studded cast. So I love it. I know it's not what was there before, but I'm very excited about it. Obviously, we do a lot of work with Sia on the Early Edge, Fantasy Football Today, DFS, where frankly, we talk about golf. We all love golf on here. No one loves golf more than you, Rick, obviously. But we both love golf, and we try to throw in a little golf reference often on FFT DFS. So I am glad to see this come to fruition. I had no idea that it was going to happen like this, and very excited to be here. I know this is a DFS show, but we will definitely be sneaking some betting nuggets in until someone slaps me on the wrist and says, do not.
I don't think anybody's going to do that. We're going to have a lot of fun. So the way this looks for the rest of the week and for the foreseeable future, Monday and Tuesday nights, 7 p.m. Eastern time. That'll get you your DFS and your best bets. We're going to go and do a live show on Wednesday, which is going to be very interactive. I think, Sia, that's the one thing that you guys have learned is the questions, the comments, the concerns that come in from the chat, really integrating them as part of the show is good for everybody, right?
It is. I mean, it drives really good conversation, but more importantly, I mean, I think what we've sort of brewed in this Early Edge and Sports Line universe is like a true community feel. So for those of you that for whatever reason don't watch the Early Wedge Monday through Friday, 10 o'clock a.m. and some of the splinter shows, of course, or not a member of Sports Line, you're going to find out real fast that like we try to include everybody. No question is a dumb question. No comment is a dumb comment. Like we're trying to, whether it's golf or anything else, we're trying to cultivate a community. We have some fun. We have some laughs. And so hopefully everybody that's listening to this or watching this, hopefully very soon you feel like you're a part of this Early Edge universe, because that's really what we're trying to cultivate.
All right. And then we're going to have a lot of live content as well. So this is the one thing that I think there's a really good spot for in the space of golf here, Mike, because there's a lot of Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday content. I think that there could be a lot better job of Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday content. And we're going to try to fill that void as well. So we're going to have a Friday show that gets you ready for the weekend, Sunday to prepare you not only for the final round, but the week ahead. So we really are trying to cover this from as many different angles as we can to provide as much success for everybody.
Yeah, I'm very fired up for the schedule. Look, honestly, I wish I could be on all 5 days, some of the weeks, and maybe we will. We will mix it in and out. But I have to admit, I personally, as the sports betting spaces continue to grow and just the addition of more markets being offered, I absolutely love a Sunday live sweat show because I am betting hole by hole. I am betting round by round. And I still think that those markets, because they're so hard to really project for a sports book for that many golfers, I think there's a ton of opportunity in that space. So very excited for it.
I love it. And then finally, before we jump into the course, the field, everything that we're going to get to this week, it's not just the three of us. So Mike was alluding to that. It's 5 days a week, and it's a bigger cast than just us three. Patrick McDonald will be jumping in. We've got Jason Sobel, who comes over. He's new to the CBS Sports family. We've got Eric Cohen. So Sia, it really is a mashup a bit of the CBS Sports golf brands that we're going to be running with here.
Yeah, it's a lot of the first cut. It's a lot of the early edge sports line. I mean, I think what's cool too is if most people who are listening or watching know most of these personalities, and I think it's such a diverse set of personalities, and I think it speaks to the diversity of opinions, but like the cultivation of a lot of different opinions, but more importantly to me, like a lot of different personalities. I mean, we're gonna have a lot of fun on this show. We're gonna win you money, hopefully, when everybody money, including ourselves. But I think this is going to be really driven by the personalities of the show and the personalities in the chat as well. So, I mean, I think we've got a pretty good mix of people here.
I love it. All right. Well, listen, let's not waste any more time. Let's get right into it. We are covering the Cognizant Classic this week. Mike, we are not on the West Coast anymore. This is Florida golf 4 weeks in a row. We're going to shoot off to Puerto Rico for one opposite field event for the API, but this is a different style of golf that's played here. This is obviously a different golf course with PGA National, the champion course that's going to test these guys differently. When you start looking at how this course is going to play a role in success or failure for players this week, what are you eyeing up?
You got to be good off the tee, number one for me. Now, I do understand that it's not just a bomber's paradise. You do have to be accurate. So I'm looking at guys that are definitely going to be strong off the tee, but I'm also looking for some bogey avoidance in general. It's just typically a spot that's played as a very difficult course overall. And, I know they have made a few changes that should soften it up just a little bit, but overall, I do expect a lot of carnage at times as well. So I will rely a little bit more on course history and Florida history here. Every time I know some of this audience has probably had this debate many times, but when you get to golf versus something like baseball, everyone wants to compare course history to batter versus pitcher data. And while I'm not a huge proponent of either, I do admit that there are times to really look into it. In baseball, it's batter versus pitch profile, something I look into a little more. Now, in golf, in terms of course history, course profile, location profile, in terms of just being in Florida, talking about types of grass, this is one of the events where I do give a lot more interest in just overall course history. And I would be interested to hear if you guys agree, disagree, indifferent. But for me, I do rely a little bit more on course history here than really probably 85% of the events on tour.
Yeah, so this golf course, as Mike mentioned, Sia, they've removed just one or two of the K9s, right? Number 10 no longer being played as a par 4. It's going to be played as a par 5, which will make it a whole lot easier. But I do love this idea of Florida golf. While I'm passing this over to you, Sia, for your thoughts on course history, I'm going to show a graphic here. These are the best players in the state of Florida. Take it for what it's worth. Over the last 6 years, I'll leave that up on screen. But Sia, when you start looking at course history and recent form or course history versus other courses, where does PGA National fall into the mix?
Yeah, it's so interesting because I do think it's sort of a case-by-case basis. I mean, I do like the Florida call in general. And by the way, I'm looking at some of these names, and I know we're going to talk about some, but some bring a smile to my face for maybe
Chris Kirk,
maybe the wrong reasons. I mean, Taylor Montgomery, Pierceson Cootie, who last year I had a first-round leader on, like super randomly. Chris Ventura, very interesting names there. But so to me, it depends on the conditions. So, for example, I think looking at history here, and we know that like the course plays a little bit easier. You talked about the 10th hole and with conditions in terms of like rain that we might see, maybe it's a softer course. But to me, looking at history, I think also depends on whether or not we get a lot of wind at this course and whether or not we're looking at historical Honda Classics, Cognizant Classics that were really wind affected and weren't really wind affected. So I do think we have to add that layer of context in. With all that said, no, I totally agree with Mike. I mean, course history is something I'm trying to get away from a little bit. And for me, it's because I think I've been a little too reliant on it in the past. With all that said, it's certainly factoring in.
The one other thing I want to consider, Mike, before we jump into this field is the field, right? So this is certainly not going to be the strength of field that you're going to get at a signature event here over the course of the next couple of weeks, but it is tangibly better than the field that we just saw in Mexico by adding in, Shane Lowry, Russell Henley, these guys at the top of the board, but it's still a lot of younger guys that we might not have as much data on, a lot of guys who are only making their second, third, fourth PGA Tour starts, some of them of their career. So how are we going to go about balancing those two things when it's getting a little bit more difficult this week?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what happens when you get to situations like this is you just see ownership kind of concentrate on a few of those guys that do carry some of the pricing and the name value. The thing that stands out to me is just two golfers at 10,000 and above, meaning you can generally kind of play whoever you want. So I think it'll be interesting to see where some of that ownership comes in. But for me, I think that it's still a situation where, again, I do value the course history a little bit here. So some of the younger guys, I will be making some harder stances on them. Like, for example, a guy like Luke Clanton, yes, younger guy. I still think he is just an absolutely elite talent. So he's treated a little differently than some of the others here, but definitely leaning for me a little heavier on some of the Florida stuff.
All right. We're going to do it. We're going to jump into the field. We're going to go tier by tier. We're going to name names. We're going to make arguments for and against, but we're going to do that after a quick word from our partners.
Gives it to Jenkins for the championship. A 16 beats a 1 from sweet to elite to the Final Four.
All right, we are back. Producer Josh, share my screen in the way that you think is best to share my screen. I will use, there we go, my website, rickrungood.com, as a jumping off point so we can keep track of everything. And Mike already mentioned it, just two golfers in this $10,000 range. Russell Henley sits at $10,700. Shane Lowry at $10,500. Sia Nejad, let's play a game called You Can Only Play One. And it works exactly how it sounds.
Yeah, so this is really interesting for a couple reasons. One is what Mike McClure said on the front end, like pricing allows you to kind of do what you want, especially considering a lot of people are probably going to start their lineups in the 9K range. But these are certainly two good options. I'll say this, if I can only pick one, it's going to be Shane Lowry. And it's not even necessarily because of his history here, although that obviously is very good. I just really like the ball striking. What's interesting, Rick, is if you look on your website, and you look at his just like the holy grail and you look at his recent ball striking, his recent approach, it's really good. But I do find it interesting when you look at the weighted ball striking recent form, like he does go down a little bit. So I don't want to invest too much on some of the stuff that he accomplished on the European tour from a metric standpoint. But Henley's just not a guy I really play, especially if he's not at the top of the board. I don't think he's going to be hyper popular necessarily. But the metrics aren't even lining up. We see it right here, right? Like, what has he lost? 6 out of 7 off the tee. He's just not, even if he hadn't lost 6 out of 7 off the tee, I still would be like Russell Henley at the top. It's like I could pick 2 or 3 guys in the 9K range I'd rather play than him.
Yeah, there is a statistical concern here, Mike. You know, Russell Henley is not a bomber, but he's usually playing out of the fairway. The fact that he has lost so frequently off the tee is a little bit of a red flag. However, you look at his history around this place. He was a winner in 2014. He's got 4 top 25 finishes in his last 5 trips. How do you try to split the hairs between these two guys at the top?
You know, honestly, just the fact that I wish Henley was like 10K, like 10K flat, $700 less, it would be a more interesting discussion in my opinion. But at 10.7, I just love the 9K range. So I'm not going to get there. I'm not going to try to really split it. I think that if you want to play Russell Henley, good luck. I think he's fine. Like, is it going to shock anyone if Russell Henley wins the event? For me, no, like not at all. But it's just not something that I'm going to get into playing that kind of price point for him in this particular field with the pricing that's available. It just seems totally unnecessary to me.
Mike, if you were playing, let's just round number 100 lineups, how many of them would avoid the 10K range altogether? Probably
75 to 80%.
Wow.
Yeah,
it's more than I thought he was going to say, Sia.
Yeah, actually, it's more than I thought he was going to say too. But I can tell you, Rick, you know, I mess around on a Monday just trying to see like what works and what fits, what different types of lineup constructions I can get away with. And the lineups I started so far were in the 9K range. And that's not going to be, to Mike's point, or even to Mike's answer, that's not going to be contrarian, right? Like, this is not the 10K range that we're used to where somebody just totally feels the need to grab a 10K guy. I think people are Some people are going to grab 2 9K guys. Some people might even grab 3 9K guys. And then if they can, just go into that low 7K range, which is rich with a lot of what will end up being some chalky guys.
Okay, well, we can look at those 9K golfers right now. There's 7 of them. They start with Daniel Berger, Sung Jae Im, Taylor Pendrith, Sepp Straka, and then we round it out with Denny McCarthy, Minwoo Lee, Keith Mitchell, and Ben Yan. I promise I won't read every name in the field, but for those who are just listening instead of watching, it does go a long way. So, Mike, 75%, 80% of the time, we are starting our lineups here. So now you've got to give me some guys that we can play here.
How about Minwoo Lee? Minwoo Lee is the guy that I personally am very high on here. I like really what I've seen from him. Honestly, top 12 at the Waste Management, T17 at Pebble. Genesis, it's definitely a tough setup. It was really all just one bad round, that second round that really kind of derailed that event. And frankly, he was probably looking at another top 15 finish with just kind of an average second round there. The question with Minwoo is typically going to be the approach play, where we did think we were seeing a little improvement. That's kind of fallen off a little bit, but really kind of checks the boxes. To me, Minwoo Lee, whether it be here in Florida, where he does have some pretty phenomenal history, is someone that's always going to pop and benefit in a field like this, one where there are good golfers, but it's not an elevated event. He's got true win equity here, and that's what I'm looking for when I want to back him in a DFS market, and a price point that really kind of goes with it at just $9,200. I mean, we're not talking about a guy that's even top 5 in salary here. So I really like what I've seen from Minwoo Lee, and he's long enough off the tee. I think he's a really good fit for this version of this tournament.
Minwoo Lee was 5% owned at the Genesis, obviously a much different field, but he does get the price increase for this week, and his history at the Cognizant, very strong, T26 and a runner-up finish in each of the last 2 years. Worth noting, he's picked up about 6.6 strokes on approach over those 8 rounds. That's the one thing that has given him trouble basically in the entirety of his career. All right, Sia, we've got Minwoo Lee on the board. Where are we heading next in this 9K round?
This is so fun because one thing people like, I didn't expect Mike to say Minwoo Lee, by the way. I thought he was going to say some of the chalky stuff that I'm about to say, but then I forgot it's Mike McClure. So for those of you that happen to be uninitiated to the Mike McClure experience, you're going to get answers that aren't necessarily similar to some of the other people that you're going to hear across like all of these types of shows. So I think I'm really excited about that because I've heard it in a football context, not necessarily golf. Okay, here are the 2 trendy guys: Berger, Straka. I mean, to me, I don't know how you can go wrong with either of those. Daniel Berger's gaining everywhere. He's really put it together, obviously from this area. I think he's actually ready to win at this point, especially in a field like this. Sepp Straka, just same with Berger. You look at the ball striking, the weighted ball striking, the long irons, the ability to win. Certainly, Sepp Straka checks that box. So I think those 2 are going to be where a lot of people start their line, certainly with Berger, maybe not so much Straka. If I could add a third that I think will end up
Hold on. Well, before you do that, Sia, because I do find that Sepp and Daniel are similar in statistical profiles. When both of them are playing well, they're gaining throughout the bag. That means in all 4 major strokes gain categories, which is usually a way to avoid bogeys and to really kind of get in a lot of trouble. Is that especially the thing about these 2 as we get to a more difficult golf course where there are going to be bogeys and doubles on the card? These guys are unlikely to hit 2 bad shots in a row.
Yeah, I think that's part of it. I mean, I'll be honest, when I was doing my initial run of modeling, and I don't really fully rely on my model, it's just kind of like a reference point for me. I kind of underweighted, and maybe you 2 disagree. I kind of underweighted around the green play, not so much putting, but around the green play a little bit. I did look at sand saves, things of that nature, but I probably need to put a little bit more there. But yeah, these guys are gaining across the board on a tough course, what should be a tougher course at least. Really like but again, it's the ability to close. I think Berger and Straka have the ability to close.
Minwoo Lee, best player in the 9K range over the last 36 rounds and strokes gained around the green. Sia, who's that third golfer that you were getting at?
I think this is a Mike McClure special. I'm going Denny McCarthy. I don't think he's going to be a guy that'll, like in a ball striking course, which is going to be the narrative. I don't think people are really going to look at him because he's not necessarily known as a ball striker. Certainly the off the tee game, it's not totally there, but it is improving as we can see up here on the screen. But he's gained in 3 out of 4 on approach in a pretty appreciable way. We know he has the short game, so he checks those boxes. Long iron's a little suspect, but recent approach tells a different story. I think Denny is primed to potentially, and I've never been a Denny guy, I think he's potentially primed to win in a field like this.
Mike, I do think that is music to your ears, is it not?
That is definitely music to my ears. Denny McCarthy is an interesting case because he's certainly not Minwoo with the distance here. As you guys mentioned off the tee, certainly going to be a struggle. But the thing that I like about Denny right now, he's just been playing a lot of golf. He's been playing a lot of golf recently. I've enjoyed the current form. You look through results, obviously, I mean, how can you not like a T5 at the Genesis, but still the Waste Management T16, the Sony Open T16. This is a course where I think that you can get away with not being super long if you can be decent on the approach here and have a great short game to make up for it. And that's what he has. Obviously, we're changing putting surfaces, always a concern. But for me, it's just the strength of the field. It's the elevated price point for a guy like Denny that some may not be used to. And again, not fitting what a lot of models may like here. So I like Denny McCarthy quite a bit. I will spend 9,300 for him here, which is kind of unbelievable. I never thought I'd say that.
I've got to play devil's advocate here. I think that's part of my job. What level of concern out of 10, 1 being 0, no concern at all, 10 being, let me rip my hair out, I'm very concerned, are the 5 missed cuts and 7 trips to PGA National for Denny McCarthy?
Probably 5. I right in the middle. It's a concern, but I think it's somewhat equal to the current form for me. I think the current form is pretty good. And like I said, just playing a lot of golf right now, it could definitely blow up in my face though, for sure. Very, very aware of that, especially at 9,300.
One thing I'll just add there, and it's such a small sample size that I'm going off, but maybe he's turned the corner a little bit with the ball striking. And also, I don't know how this field compares to some of the prior fields over the last, 3 or 4 years. I think it was last year, wasn't necessarily a great field, but prior to that, I think the fields were a little bit better. So that does factor in a little bit for me.
There are 2 guys that we have yet to speak about, and I am stunned because one of them is named Sungjae Im, who I think if we wiped out the last couple weeks or maybe 2025 in general, we would have started here. The 2020 winner, a T8 in 2021 on paper, a really good spot for him. But I'll throw this to you, Mike. The approach play his last 4 trips here has been negative. The 2025 performance does not look very Sungjae-esque. What do we do with this big name?
I'm going to be on team fade here. At 9,800, you can't make the pricing, but if he was like 9K, I would obviously have a lot different answer, I think. But at 9,800, there's a couple of guys, Minwoo being one of them, that I'm going to play in nearly every lineup. If we're talking, not 100 lineups, of course, but if we're talking, 5 lineups, I'm playing Minwoo in pretty much every one of them. So I'm going to be off of Sungjae here. Now, this is a move that I pull a little bit in NFL, and I know I've seen some people not liking the cross sport references. You're going to have to deal with it for a day or two.
I feel like I know other things. Like I'm going to learn about baseball and I'm going to learn about football. I love this.
Exactly. So when we play DFS NFL, Sia and I often talk about a popular player, particularly at a running back position, right? If I can't quite get enough exposure to them in my lineups, I will go look at an anytime touchdown market. And the thought process there is, Rick, if that guy's going to beat me and hurt me in DFS, he's going to have to score a touchdown as a running back who's only touching the football 8 to 10 times, right? So there's a scenario where I can cash that touchdown, not get hurt in DFS. But it's an insurance policy. Same thing here with Sungjae.
What's the anytime touchdown of golf?
For me, it's often a top 30 finish or a top 40 finish. One that is certainly making the cut, certainly playing the weekend, which you obviously need to do. But if Sungjae goes out here and has a top 20 finish, it's not going to bust me in DFS. And it's going to allow me to still profit from the situation. If he wins the event, I'm in trouble, and I'm willing to accept that risk. So I will probably bet a bad number on Sungjae in my model on a top 20, 30, or 40, depending on where everything settles, and ultimately fade him in DFS.
Okay, fair enough. Last man before we move on here is Keith Mitchell. And if you look at his history around this golf course, Nejad, you're going to see a lot of good stuff. Winner in 2019, a top 10 finish in each of the last 2 years. His metrics do seem to be trending, but it's vintage Keith. Great tee to green play, the inability to putt. Can we get a little bit of a boost now that we go to these flatter Bermuda grass greens, or are we just not in on Keith this week?
This would be, from a DFS standpoint, I think this would be a situation where if nobody's going to play Keith Mitchell because everybody's just gravitating to like 3 or 4 other 9K guys, I think it's fair, because my initial response was going to be, yeah, I'm out on Keith Mitchell. I'm always out on Keith Mitchell. But I do have to respect what you just said, because I'm looking at it right now. The ball striking over the last 4 tournaments, pretty great. I mean, not great, but, solid, right? And the putter hasn't been a complete disaster. The around the green play has been okay. He's a guy like Sung J M. I don't want to play Sung J M either, but we're playing a game here at the end of the day. And if Keith Mitchell, I mean, Sung J is going to get some ownership because his name is Sung J. But if Keith Mitchell has no ownership, I mean, again, if I play 10 lineups, I'm happy to put him in a couple of them.
Fair enough. What has not been fair is my use of the chat. I've been very bad. I need to be trained a little bit better. I will answer a couple of questions, comments, and concerns that are coming through. If you've got them, get them in the chat right now. We're going to continue down into the 8K range, but first we're going to take a quick pause and we'll see you on the other side.
I feel home when I see the faces that remember my own. When I'm with my friends, I feel home.
Are you going to do a regular betting show as well? Well, it might not be us three specifically, but that's the Tuesday show. So for our friends in Ontario who do not have access to DFS, but we do have access to the wagering market, that will be available for you. As mentioned, some live chats, some live betting stuff coming along the way as well. This $8,000 range on DraftKings starts with Davis Thompson and Cameron Young. It goes all the way down to Andrew Novak. There are only 10 golfers here. And Mike, I'll start with you. If we are kind of starting our lineups in that 9K range, if we're getting a couple options there, is there anything in this 8K range that jumps out to you as somebody to kind of pair with those lineups?
I'll start with Ben Griffin. I think he's ultimately got the talent. I like that it's 8,500, not 8,800. And to me, Ben Griffin is a guy that really is just someone I think benefits significantly from a field that's just a little bit weaker than some of the events that he's typically played. I don't have a lot of, he's not going to be leading this field in terms of off the tee or on approach or really even with the short game, but he's going to be in that range where I think that any given round, he's unlikely to go blow up and really destroy a lineup. And that's kind of what I'm looking for in one of these ranges. I think he's got the win equity. I think he's got the upside to compete in a field this level. But I really think that there's not a ton of downside. Now, some may clearly disagree with that, but I don't think there's a ton of downside to Ben Griffin here. So I really like him at this price point. I don't think it's just such an obvious click that we're going to be talking about massive ownership at that point, which is also something I am really, really concerned with when I'm having a relatively chalky build starting in the 9s, not the 10s.
Only 2 missed cuts for Ben Griffin since the 3M Open, and he plays a lot. In fact, he's proudly played every event this year, and he says it's not stopping anytime soon. Sia, when I open up this 8K range to you, I must point out Jordan Spieth resides in this range, making his Cognizant Classic debut. Kurt Kitayama, who was one of the favorites from last week, gets a significant discount. Am I alluring you with anything here, or would you like to go in another direction?
You know how the 8K range is typically like kind of a dead spot because people do the 10K, 9K, and they drop down to like the low 7Ks or whatever it is. I think this is such a classic example of nobody wanting to play the 8K range. And again, we're playing DFS, so we do probably want to grab some guys. I do think Ben Griffin is the best bet here. And I think he is going to grab some ownership at a reasonable price, 8,500 in this field. I don't know that I can get to anybody else. To be honest, I looked at Spieth, I looked at Davis Thompson, I look at Andrew Novak. I'm an Andrew Novak guy. Couldn't get there with him. I think Kurt Kitayama would be the guy. And I don't want to get burned by Kurt Kitayama like everybody else has over the last, 3-4 weeks, whatever it's been. But I do like the fact that he's burned enough people where like people, especially because they want to avoid this range anyway and just play a different sort of 9K, 7K game. I think Kurt Kitayama is pretty interesting. So it's Griffin, it's Kurt Kitayama for me, and then I'm out.
Yeah, here's the X factor. Here's Kurt Kitayama. I know Jordan Spieth could finish first or last. Mike, I want to dive into something you mentioned a little bit earlier about this being a new putting surface, and I think that is kind of a big deal, right? I think when these guys who are playing every single week and they get to go to Florida and get these flat Bermuda grass greens, he has struggled. He struggled to putt in Phoenix. He struggled to putt in Mexico. This is Kurt Kitayama I'm speaking about. The rest of the metrics seem very strong. The way that he models is always going to be positive because of his ball striking. He finished third here in his last trip. But the other big thing is this like huge drop off from 10,200 to 8,300 over 2 rounds. What do we do in this situation? Because it seems to be one of the more unique situations that we have in this field.
I would be right back on him. If you liked Kurt Kitayama here, I think this is a fine place to play him. I do agree that the change in the putting surface matters a lot. I think you have to kind of throw out what you saw at Mexico. Like, yes, it sucks. It sucks. He has a bad week, but I think this is a fine setup for him. And I think it's justified in the pricing change here. And, again, if this were $9,000 Kurt Kitayama, I might have a slightly different answer here. But at 8,300, I really think the upside justifies everything, despite what you saw last week.
Sherlock has a comment that I might need Sia the lawyer to litigate here. So he says, Kitayama just feels like fool's gold at this point. Never gonna not play him, but I can't say I believe in him. That is a lot of negatives. Do all those negatives somehow equal a positive? What is Sherlock saying in this moment?
Well, he's saying he's gonna play him, but he doesn't want to.
Okay.
What's interesting is Sherlock. And by the way, I noticed Thorb is in the chat, musical artist, big fan and friend of Thorb. The thing is that's the sentiment for most people. So even though it's such a huge discount on Kurt Kitayama, I think people are done. And once we get into the 7K range, I think it'll illustrate that a lot more, because there's plenty of guys in the 7K range that have been playing really, really well in the upper 7K and the lower 7K range that people are not as frustrated with compared to Kurt Kitayama. So to me, if you grab like 2 guys in the 8K range, and one of them can be Kurt Kitayama, he certainly would be one for me. Your lineup's already going to be different than a lot of people. So it's just something to consider. This 8K range is going to feel like a dead area to a lot of people. If you grab 2 guys, lineup construction vastly different.
David seems to be going for Davis Thompson, Patrick Rogers, and Austin Eckroat. I believe that is also Lee Hodges at the end of that list there. Mike, I read the outline, and maybe a disagreement here on Patrick Rogers.
A little bit. You talk about Patrick Rogers. He's had a lot of success over the last few weeks, but just, you got strokes gained off the tee, fine. The approach play still isn't great. And to me, it's just a name that we've seen. You have to remember DFS is still a game with humans playing a game. And you've seen the name Patrick Rogers a lot more of late because of the recent success. I think that leads to just enough elevation and ownership where, again, it's not that I don't love Patrick Rogers here. It's just one of those situations where, like, can I find the extra 300 for Ben Griffin? Yes, I definitely can. Would I rather play Kurt Kitayama at $100 more and really bank on some of that approach play and bank on people wanting to jump off after what they just saw? Yes, I would. So I just don't think this is a great time with the change in the putting surface going to the Florida swing. I'm going to be out on Patrick Rogers.
Out on Patrick Rogers for Mike. I'm looking at the rest of this range. We're about to get to the 7s, and it's going to really open up from here. Is there anybody else, gents, that we need to talk about before I take us there?
I don't think so. I mean, I'm a Max Grazerman guy, but I can't get there with the current form. He's kind of all over the place. I do think Michael Kim is interesting because I don't know if he's turned a corner or not, but he's certainly playing some good golf. So I think he's another guy in the 8K range that's going to be largely overlooked. I'm talking about the range itself as opposed to the players I'm mentioning that I think you could include in your lineups. I don't love it, but I think you could include him in some of your lineups.
Working now with Joe Mayo on the short game seems to be turning a little bit of a corner in that department. The $7,000 range, 44 names. This is where I said, I promise I won't read them all. The top end, Alex Smalley, Billy Horschel, JJ Spawn, a handful of other familiar names. The middle of this range, that's where you'll find Christian Bezadenhout, Gary Woodland, Johnny Vegas. And then the bottom of this range, Sia, Joe Highsmith, Joel Damon, a couple of bucket hats, although those are more sun hats than bucket hats, in my opinion, along with KH Lee and Matt Kuchar. So Sia, where would you like to go here?
I guess we could start at the top.
Okay.
I mean, I'll go kind of in that 7,900 to 7,500 range. I think Smalley is like kind of an obvious play. I don't really understand. Again, I'm kind of going on recent form, especially in tournaments like this, kind of in general. But where's the problem with Smalley? Like, let's throw it up on Rick Run Good here. Like, everything looks pretty good. The ball striking, the short game, he's flashing upside with the top 20 finishes. Again, recent ball striking, recent putting, all looks good. And if you look at the weighted total tab, and I kind of flirted with 22 rounds just to be a little different, but the weighted total tab, and I guess it was on your site, Rick, it's under not golfer profiles, but power rankings.
Yes, that's correct.
So Smalley, and again, last 22 rounds, is third on the board behind Sepp Straka, Daniel Berger, and then it's Smalley. And oh, by the way, it's Taylor Moore, Michael Kim, Denny McCarthy, Sam Stevens, Hodges, and Spawn from there. But again, I don't see the weak spot in Smalley. The only other guy I'll mention as pivots is JJ Spawn and Brian Harmon.
Let's see. Alex Smalley, I'll go back to the RSM Classic. I'll give him one extra event there. Has gained tee to green in 6 straight. The ball striking numbers are very, very good. He's been hot with the putter. There is really a lot to like about Alex Smalley, including that top 10 from last week, and still coming in at a fairly cheap price. I want to target Luke Clanton here for you, Mike, because you had mentioned something earlier. You were talking about how you think he is different. Different how?
I just think he's absolutely elite. When I look at everything, the way I model everything, he's certainly, again, we're talking limited sample sizes, but certainly a model darling and should be priced. I personally think he should be 8,500 in this field, which you can argue back and forth whether or not he should be, but I think there's a ton of value on him. I'm going to continue to trust the data and the profile that I've seen. The question marks certainly around the greens definitely could be an issue. The putting surfaces themselves could be an issue, but when you get to the change in surface here, it's not a particularly difficult place to putt, especially for someone who's very familiar with this particular setup in general. So I like Luke Clanton here. Again, just off the tee, the distance, and just coming in here, he needs to make a cut to get the tour card. Certainly expecting that to happen, and all good things for him going forward after that moment. So it's really just a price point play at 7,700. I think that's, I'm not going to speak for everyone, but I think we would all agree, at least raise your eyebrows at Clanton at 7,700.
Yeah, one made cut away from earning that PGA Tour card. He has one putt away in Phoenix, could not get it to drop. It is just a matter of time. It probably happens here on Friday evening. Sia, I open up the rest of this range back to you, because there are a lot of names that we've seen here in 2025 to various bits of success. Harry Hall, Nikolai Højgaard, Sam Stevens. These are names that have been playing a lot. It's not an injection of Korn Ferry Tour guys or anything like that. Where else can we find a little bit of value down here?
You mentioned Nikolai Højgaard, and I don't think a lot of people are going to be on him, because I think they think especially the off the tee play is a little suspect with the accuracy and things of that nature. But I do think we know he's got some good recent form, but I do think Nikolai Højgaard, just from a talent standpoint, is better than a lot of people that are priced near him. So I think at 7,400, he's a really solid play. Certainly hit or miss with the short game, but you're just going to have to deal with that. Ryan Gerard, I think somebody in the chat mentioned him. Long iron's good, ball striking good, putter's been hot since November. So we're talking the last 4 months? T14, T37, T51, T15, T17, and he was 4th at the Honda Classic in 2023. Absolutely love him. I'll mention a couple other names. Bud Cauley, the metrics lately have been really good on him. Joel Dahmen really rated out well for me. And then finally, this one is an absolute flyer. Nobody's going to own him. I'll probably miss the cut, but Jacob Bridgman at 7,000. His middle to long iron play is pretty elite. And the Bermuda putting is really good. And so those are just a couple of things in that 7,000 range, or at a flat 7,000, that I appreciate for a golfer that far down.
The Joel Dahmen stuff is pretty interesting here. He's $7,000 this week. He is back to hitting those second shots pretty well. I love the fact that he's got a T9 at Torrey Pines, not a good golf course for him. He's got a T6 in Mexico, not a good golf course for him. And I think this should probably be a better spot for him to go out and find some more success. So he is certainly brewing. I've got a recent defending champion in Jake Knapp. I've got our most recent winner in Brian Campbell. Mike, I assume you think that Brian Campbell is going to go back-to-back this week.
Absolutely expecting Brian Campbell to go back-to-back. No, that'll be a fade. And I want to go back real quickly, only because I've got a little model value on Joel Dahmen, top 20 plus 475. Love the price point, love the play. So I wanted to co-sign that Joel Dahmen play. I think that he is sneaky in this field. But yes, I am definitely not expecting Mr. Brian Campbell, as great as he was. I don't think that we're going to see a back-to-back. I wouldn't be surprised if he missed the cut here.
Yeah, well, as we all saw coming after a WD T51 miscut, the win in Mexico where he was nearly flawless. Sure, no problem there. Reminds me a lot. I'm trying to think of like a Jim Herman victory, of a Michael Kim victory from a couple of years ago, where it just doesn't make any sense, and he finds himself in the winner's circle. Sia, before we move on a bit, I do look at this Jake Knapp profile, and I see a golfer who kind of won early in his career, fell off, kind of worked through a lot of different things, seems to be playing well. The one thing that I want to point out about Knapp is he really, I think he got quite lucky to make the cut. The number came back to him in Mexico, but then he played awesome on the weekend. How much should I be considering that? Just like the completely out of contention 5 strokes that he gained on the weekend and moved up to a T25.
Jake Knapp has plenty of upside. I mean, obviously, right? So I don't know that I'm going to get to him, and maybe it's just poor logic on my part, because the metrics look pretty good. He was certainly good last week for the most part. I'm just out on. I'd rather play. So Sherlock has it in here. Kevin Roy. I'd rather play Kevin Roy this week than Jake Knapp.
I should unmute myself. Anybody else here, Mike, in the 7K range before I pop us on down?
You know, I still wanted to co-sign Bud Cauley as well at 7,300, only because of the same price there with Knapp. I think that Kevin Roy is a good call out as well, but Bud Cauley is someone that really kind of pops for me. In fact, just looking at over the last 24 rounds, he's 10th in total strokes gained in this field, and that's all coming off the tee and just hitting greens in regulation. So for me, I think that I'm less concerned about the putting, which is certainly been an issue, but Bud Cauley would be the guy for me at 7,300.
Last
Rick,
three. Yes.
Go ahead. Yeah.
I was just going to say last 3 trips to PGA National, T12, T42, T21. Go ahead, Sia.
I don't know that we mentioned Lee Hodges, but I think at 7,400, he's probably a misprice. He's probably one of those guys in the lower 7K range that's going to suck up a lot of ownership. I mean, he just rates out really well. The ball striking has been pretty incredible, considering the price at least. The putter can really strike. The course history is there. He's shown he can win, obviously, at the 3M Open. Flashed upside at the Farmers, RSM, and Sony. So he's a guy that probably should be like, I don't know, 8K, 7,900, and he's not.
Yeah, quite honestly, from the fall on, he's been very good. He plugged the hole with the putter and has been much better over his last 5 starts there. So it's really starting to show up in those results. Let's bop on down to the lowest of ranges. Now, this is where I really feel the 6K range. This is where I feel there's a drop off. And I understand that we have gradually made our way through this, Mike. Clearly, guys in the 7K range were not as good as the guys in the 9K range. We can always kind of trick yourself as you take those steps down. Here is where I look at the names at the top, like Adam Svensson, Jesper Svensson. Let's just throw them both at 6,900. The middle of the range is Matt McCarty, Matty Schmid, all the M's in one spot. I think you like that, Mike. And then Rafael Campos, Luke Donald, Kevin Kisner is in this field at the bare minimum. This is where I think there is a pretty significant drop-off in talent.
There's a huge drop off in talent, and it's kind of correlated to me not really wanting to play anybody, 10,000 and above, those 2 golfers. I'm not really playing anybody in this range, to be honest with you. I'm running lineups right now, letting them build, and I'm still searching for a 6 when I'm looking at all these numbers here, and I'm really not getting anywhere. So I'm happy to sit here and talk through them, but to me, it's just a kind of a clear sign that it's just not necessary in this event.
Well, I'm going to make you talk through them, but I will. That was my next question is, you told me earlier, 75 to 80% of your hypothetical 100 lineups would start in the 9K range, which is not only an avoidance of the 10K range, but it's also kind of an avoidance of the 6K range. So you're saying that because of some of the roster constructions that we can put together, it is not really necessary to get down here.
That is exactly what I'm saying. It is not necessary. Like, can we have a situation like we did last week? Absolutely. I don't think it is likely. I think there's enough talent, and I think there's some mispricings just by simply not having, 3 other golfers approaching 10K or 10.2, that I really think the pricing is so soft and it's not necessary.
Okay, fair enough. I'll hold Mike's feet to the fire in just a second, Sia, but can I get a name or two out of you in this 6K range that you think are viable options?
I feel like Adam Svensson is showing some signs, and we know from a talent standpoint, like he probably, like in a field like this 2 years ago, Adam Svensson wouldn't have been 6,900. I feel like, the putter is very cold. Okay, that's there, but the ball striking and the long iron, medium to long iron play has been solid. I just feel like he's a guy that, if he just wasn't in such a funk, particularly with the putter, could be a guy at like 7,700 or something like that. I think the talent is there for Adam Svensson, especially when you contrast his name with some of the others that are in this 6K range. I think Jackson Suber, obviously a model darling. I think he's interesting. I'm kind of hoping he pops at some point. And at 6,600, I'm probably willing to take the chance on him here and there. And then finally, Henrik Norlander is real, like solid long irons. Recent approach play has been pretty elite. Putter's an issue. What did we do at Mexico, Rick? He gained over 10 strokes on approach. I mean, it's crazy.
He did.
And by the way, that's not a random event for Henrik Norlander. And that's why I like to play him sometimes as first round leader. I know he's not necessarily a great course fit, but he also spiked on approach at Butterfield, Omega Masters, the 3M. Like he has really gained it a huge way on approach at a lot of different tournaments, more so than most. I think he's really interesting.
I just love Sia saying he spiked at Butterfield, which is like completely normal statement to make. Henrik Norlander, $6,500, and Sia is right, capable of gaining 5+ strokes on approach in any given week. I also will note Adam Svensson, Palm Beach Gardens guy. This is basically going to be a home game for him. Obviously, adopted home. He's Canadian. I now, Mike, need a name. I will need a name or two from you, or I will not be allowed to end the show.
Well, Sia did look, I don't know if he's looking at the rundown. The only guy I really mentioned and co-signed for would be Adam Svensson here. And it is just the pure talent. I do think that he is the most talented here. It's kind of cheating. He's barely 6K range. He's 6,900. The only other one I could talk about real quickly would be, how about Patrick Fishburne? Look, I think that there is maybe enough talent here. I played him last week. I'm a little bitter with a round 277 because I would be lying if I said I wasn't counting my top 30 winnings after the opening round 65. I was very much counting those winnings. A 77 round 2, we're talking about 4 consecutive missed cuts. He did T6 in Hawaii at the Sony. I think that you could do worse. Again, understanding this is not where I want to be in the 6K range. But I do think if you're looking for a really high variance approach, I don't think Patrick Fishburne could be completely ruled out.
Sherlock has nailed the guy that I'm most interested in, which would be Chris Ventura. Just the raw talent here of it's his birthday. He just turned 30. I love when I find the Easter egg there.
Lock button. That is a lock button play.
Chris Ventura's birthday. I didn't even know that. Yeah, turns 30. A little bit of a late bloomer, but look at what he's been up to here in 2025. He's gaining a lot of strokes on approach. He's putting a lot better. I think this is a pretty decent spot to run him out, and I got lucky with a little bit of a birthday narrative along the way. I'm out of things. I'm out. And I mean, what else do we have to talk about before I put a bow on our very first episode of this relaunch of the Early Wedge?
The one thing I'll say is, pay attention to ownership, because there's going to be some collection areas, particularly in that 7K range. And that's fine. Some of those players are solid and deserving of the ownership, but just take note of the players right next to them that are not getting the ownership, because those players, probably are not just as likely, but almost as likely to spike. So just something to keep in mind. And if you want to mix up your roster construction, just know that a couple of 9K guys, that's where a lot of people are probably starting. So figure out a way to maybe mix it up with some contrarian plays in the 7K range, or get some 8K range guys involved.
And I just want to mention Gary Woodland again quickly. I really spent too much time talking about how much I love Luke Clanton. He's going to get the tour card. Going to play him. He's drastically mispriced, but I think Gary Woodland is too as well. I know Gary's had a lot of struggles, with his health and with his personal life. I think that he has really turned the corner, though. I like him in this field a lot. The concerns for me are going to be around the greens and on the putting surfaces themselves. But once again, changing surface, and I really don't think it's that big a deal. I think that it's kind of accounted for in just the course setup and the strength of the field. Gary Woodland, with the distance that he has, I really think that he can put himself in a good position on this golf course.
Yeah, rooting for Gary as well. Would like to see him back in contention. Again, we are nowhere near done for this week. And speaking of ownership, we'll have a much better idea of what that looks like on Wednesday when we go live to chat about those things and answer your questions. Tomorrow's show, Tuesday's show, Sia will be back. Mike and I will take the day, but it'll be best bets with Sia, Eric Cohen, Jason Sobel, Patrick McDonald. Sia, that's pretty stacked, brother.
It's a pretty good cast. That's going to be really, really fun. We're going to go over our outrights, some top finishing positions, matchup bets, first round leaders, you name it. That show will have it from a betting standpoint.
The homes that you're looking for, the Sportsline YouTube channel, which you could be watching on right now. Great. If you are, awesome. We're also streaming on the Golf on CBS YouTube channel, but eventually that will stop. You've got time. It'll be a couple of weeks, if not a couple of months. And then the Early Edge audio feed podcast, wherever you get your pods, is where this show is available. I do not think I have missed any announcements, so I think I'm going to get a thumbs up of approval from producer Josh. I'm waiting for it. Josh, give me a thumbs up. Oh, okay. He's not going to give me a thumbs up. So I'm just going to roll on. Okay. The show tomorrow is at 7 p.m. Eastern time, 4 p.m. for those of you on the West Coast. Big thanks to producer Josh. He does all the hard work behind the scenes. Mike McClure, Sia Nejad. I'm Rick Gehman. This has been the Early Wedge. We'll see you next time.